Before you hear anything else, you need to know this. Right now, at this exact moment, someone richer, smarter, or more powerful than you is using a psychological trick you've never heard of to influence a room, shift a decision, win a negotiation, or quietly take control of a situation without saying a single manipulative word. And what's even more unsettling is the fact that these tricks work on almost everyone, including the people who think they're too intelligent to fall for them, because the human brain is built with blind spots. The wealthy and powerful have learned to exploit with surgical precision. The truth is that rich and powerful people do not dominate others with force, aggression, or authority, the way movies make you believe. Instead, they use subtle, silent psychological cues that trigger primitive responses in the human mind. Meaning, while you're analyzing what someone said, they're controlling how you feel. And while you're focusing on logic, they're pulling the emotional levers that determine your decisions without you realizing you never made the decision consciously in the first place. Most people completely misunderstand power because they think it comes from money, status, or influence. But the wealthy know an uncomfortable secret that almost no one talks about. Power doesn't come from who you are. It comes from what people believe you are. Because in psychology, perception is reality, and the powerful manipulate perception so effectively that people hand them influence without ever noticing they've been guided into obedience, admiration, or strategic compliance. This is why the richest and most influential individuals spend more time controlling attention than controlling outcomes. Because attention is the gateway to perception, and perception shapes belief, and belief shapes behavior. So if they can control what people pay attention to, they can control the frame of the entire interaction, meaning they can guide your emotions, your conclusions, and even your reactions while you think you're acting out of your own free will. One of the strongest psychological tricks the powerful use is something so subtle you've seen it thousands of times without ever recognizing its influence. Because power is rarely shown directly. It is implied through posture, pacing, silence, timing, and selective expression. And the wealthy use these micro behaviors to send subconscious signals that say, "I am the one you should listen to," triggering ancient social instincts in the people around them. Instincts wired into the human brain from a time when reading dominance meant survival. And the most fascinating thing is that the powerful rarely raise their voice, because loudness is the weapon of the insecure, but silence is the weapon of the confident. And when someone at the top falls silent in a room, people lean in, minds quiet down, and the emotional center of the conversation shifts toward them without a single word being spoken, demonstrating one of the most overlooked psychological laws. The person who controls the silence controls the room. Another psychological trick the rich use instinctively is what behavioral scientists call status framing, which means they position themselves as the highest value individual before the conversation even begins, not through bragging or showing off, but by subtly shifting the context so that people perceive them as the authority, the selector, or the evaluator. And once your brain categorizes someone as higher status, you unconsciously defer to their opinions, respect their boundaries, and mirror their behavior without realizing you've surrendered psychological ground. And here's where things become even more unsettling. Powerful people understand that humans follow emotional momentum, not logic, so they engineer the emotional tone of the interaction before introducing their request, meaning they set the mood: calm, urgency, curiosity, admiration, uncertainty, gratitude, and allow that emotion to guide your decision-making, because your brain is wired to justify emotional choices with rational explanations after the fact, making you believe you made the decision consciously, when in reality, your feelings made it for you. One of the most cunning psychological tactics the wealthy use is something called intentional understatement, which means they deliberately downplay their desires, their achievements, or their expectations in order to create an emotional gap in your mind, a gap your brain automatically fills with assumptions of competence, superiority, or mystique. Because when someone with confidence holds back information, the mind projects power onto them, turning understatement into one of the most potent tools of influence ever discovered. And perhaps the biggest psychological advantage the rich and powerful have is their mastery of detachment. Not the kind of coldness people assume, but a strategic emotional distance that gives them control over their reactions, making them unpredictable, unshakable, and unmanipulable. Because the moment you detach from the need for approval or validation, you gain one of the most unfair advantages in human psychology: the ability to influence others without being influenced back. But the trick that truly separates the powerful from everyone else is something shockingly simple, yet incredibly difficult for most people to master. They understand that emotions spread faster than logic, so they project the emotion they want others to feel, and the nervous systems around them absorb it unconsciously. Meaning if they project confidence, others feel trust. If they project calmness, others feel stability. If they project certainty, others feel alignment. And if they project scarcity, others feel urgency, which is why people follow them so effortlessly, even when they don't fully understand why. And here is the secret no one wants you to know. These psychological tricks work not because the powerful are special, but because the average person is unaware of how easily their subconscious can be influenced. Meaning, if you don't understand these tactics, you will always be on the receiving end of them, not the controlling end, and your emotions, decisions, and reactions will continue to be shaped by people who know exactly which buttons to push to get what they want from you. You begin to understand that the most powerful psychological trick the rich and powerful use isn't money, intelligence, or even charisma, but the ability to control the emotional temperature of any room they walk into, because they know that the person who controls the emotional climate controls the decisions, and the person who controls the decisions controls the outcomes, and the person who controls the outcomes controls everything that happens next. They don't walk into conversations reacting. They walk in with a preloaded emotional agenda, carefully calibrated to the response they want from you. And once you start noticing it, it becomes impossible to unsee, because it suddenly clicks why you leave certain conversations feeling nervous, uncertain, compelled, guilty, trusting, or even inferior, without understanding what happened in the moment. If you've ever watched someone powerful walk into a negotiation and remain completely silent for the first 30 seconds, staring, observing, waiting, not out of awkwardness, but out of calculated dominance, then you've witnessed one of their favorite psychological strategies. Because silence makes most people uncomfortable, and discomfort forces people to speak prematurely, reveal information, or justify themselves unnecessarily. The rich know that the first person to talk usually loses, because the first person to talk exposes their emotional state, and they value emotional neutrality the same way a professional gambler values a straight face. Because when you cannot be read, you cannot be manipulated, and when you cannot be manipulated, you control the board. Another trick they rely on is emotional contrast, creating a subtle emotional imbalance that forces you to chase their approval, because they alternate between warmth and coldness, attention and detachment, approval and disapproval, in ways so subtle that you don't realize you're being conditioned like a psychological slot machine. They give you a small reward, maybe praise, validation, interest, or a moment of intense focus, and then they pull away completely, leaving you wanting the warm moment back. And this desire to regain emotional closeness makes you compliant, cooperative, eager to please, and less likely to question their authority, because now you're not just interacting with them logically, you're interacting emotionally, and emotional investment blinds judgment. They also master the art of selective vulnerability, a trick that looks innocent but is deeply manipulative because they reveal a controlled, tiny personal flaw or struggle. Not because they want to connect honestly, but because they know vulnerability creates trust, and trust opens psychological doors that power can walk through without resistance. They might share a carefully curated story about a mistake they made, a challenge they overcame, or a fear they once had. But these details are never random. They're strategically chosen to build an impression of authenticity while still reinforcing their image of competence, strength, or resilience, making you feel like you've seen their human side, even though you've only seen the version they want you to see. Then there's the expert-level trick of emotional pacing, where they intentionally slow down their reactions, their speech, and their facial expressions to force you into their psychological rhythm. Because whoever sets the pace of the interaction controls the power dynamic. If you react quickly while they react slowly, you're in their frame, not yours, which means they can dictate the meaning of events, shape the narrative, and make your urgency feel like weakness. They know that emotional speed equals emotional exposure, and emotional exposure equals leverage for the other side. So they stay slow, steady, and controlled, letting you feel rushed, impulsive, and shaky while they maintain the illusion of superiority. One of the most subtle tricks they use is emotional prediction. They observe patterns in your reactions, your fears, your insecurities, your ambitions, and they mentally map which emotions drive your decisions so they can activate those emotions on command when they need a specific outcome from you. If they sense approval motivates you, they withhold and then reward it. If they sense fear motivates you, they apply subtle pressure. If they sense ambition motivates you, they hint at opportunities. If they sense insecurity motivates you, they create a contrast that makes you want to impress them. Nothing is random. Nothing is impulsive. Nothing is out of emotional alignment with their strategic intent, because they treat emotional influence like a chessboard where every move sets up the next. They also understand the psychology of scarcity better than anyone. Not just financial scarcity, but emotional scarcity. The feeling that their time, attention, approval, or partnership is rare, limited, or difficult to obtain, which makes you overvalue their presence and underestimate your own. The less available they appear, the more people fight for their recognition. And the more people fight for their recognition, the easier it becomes for them to guide thoughts, influence decisions, and maintain control without exerting obvious effort. Scarcity creates pressure. Pressure creates urgency. Urgency creates compliance. And compliance keeps them in power. Another strategy they use expertly is emotional mirroring, but not the kind you read about in pop psychology. This is a darker, more calculated version where they mirror your energy only long enough to build rapport, then slowly shift the emotional tone so you unconsciously follow them. They match your enthusiasm, your confidence, your seriousness, or your vulnerability at the beginning, and once you step into emotional sync, they begin pulling you toward a different emotional state, usually one that benefits them, without you noticing that you're no longer leading your own feelings. This emotional steering is so subtle that you think you're making your own decisions, but really, you're being guided by emotional alignment that they engineered. They're also experts at psychological isolation, making you feel like they're the only person who truly understands your goals, your dreams, or your struggles. creating a sense of emotional exclusivity that binds you to them, even if the relationship is purely transactional. They make you feel selected, chosen, special, elevated, like you're part of a hidden circle with access to insight or opportunity that others don't have. And this illusion of exclusivity makes you more loyal, more open, and more dependent on their influence, because the human brain craves belonging more deeply than logic or rational independence. Finally, they master the psychological art of narrative shaping, not just telling stories, but controlling the emotional meaning behind events, so power always gravitates back to them. If they make a mistake, they reframe it as a test, a lesson, or a strategic move. If you question them, they reframe your doubt as misunderstanding or inexperience. If they want you to take action, they frame it as an opportunity rather than a command. They make every narrative serve their image, their authority, and their leverage. And because human beings understand life through stories, whoever controls the emotional story controls the emotional reality. And by the time you finally step back and look at the whole picture, you realize the real secret isn't that the rich and powerful are smarter than everyone else. It's that they understand emotions, not as feelings, but as tools, levers, triggers, and psychological currencies that shape human behavior. And they use these tools with precision, while the average person uses them accidentally, impulsively, or unconsciously. Once you understand this, everything about their influence begins to make sense. The deeper you look into the psychology of the rich and powerful, the more you realize that their greatest advantage isn't access to resources, but the way they manipulate emotional perception. Because while most people respond to reality as it is, they respond to reality as they design it, shaping how others interpret their actions, their value, and their authority, until perception becomes more influential than truth itself. They understand that humans don't respond to facts first. They respond to the emotional meaning attached to those facts, and so they carve that meaning intentionally, turning ordinary situations into symbols of power, transforming setbacks into narratives of resilience, and using even their smallest victories as demonstrations of inevitability, making people believe that aligning with them is safer, smarter, and more rewarding than standing against them. You start to notice that one of their most subtle strategies is creating emotional asymmetry, where they treat their emotions as assets to be managed and yours as vulnerabilities to be exploited, because they know that the person who feels less has the power and the person who feels more has the weakness. And so they master emotional detachment, not because they lack emotion, but because they refuse to allow emotion to guide them. While others panic, they stay calm. While others seek reassurance, they offer none. While others rush for clarity, they remain ambiguous, forcing people to interpret their silence as strength and their unpredictability as superiority. Because when you never reveal your emotional hand, people project onto you whatever quality intimidates them most. Another psychological technique they use is what could be called status anchoring, where they intentionally set an emotional baseline that makes their presence feel elevated and significant, so that every interaction with them feels like an upgrade from your normal reality. They do this through the way they speak, slower, more deliberate, more measured, as if every word has weight, and through the way they hold eye contact, not aggressively, but with a calm confidence that signals they are evaluating rather than seeking validation, subtly placing themselves in the position of emotional authority. You find yourself adjusting your tone, your body language, your enthusiasm just to match them, and whether you realize it or not, the very act of adjusting means they've already established psychological dominance. They also use the power of emotional reframing, a skill that allows them to turn any situation, good or bad, into an opportunity to appear wiser, stronger, or more indispensable, because they know that people follow the person who makes them feel safer. And reframing is a tool that transforms fear into direction. If a deal fails, they frame it as data. If someone betrays them, they frame it as a test. If they lose something, they frame it as strategic sacrifice. And this ability to spin reality into advantage makes people trust their leadership even when logic says otherwise. They're not just navigating emotions, they're re-engineering them. And once you adopt their frame, you stop questioning their authority and start relying on it. One of the most fascinating emotional tricks they use is what psychologists call delayed validation, an influence technique where they withhold approval long enough for people to crave it, but not so long that people give up, creating a psychological tension that keeps others constantly striving to impress them. The rich and powerful do this masterfully. They compliment rarely, reward unexpectedly, and praise strategically, never giving too much too soon, because they understand that humans value whatever feels scarce. And when their approval becomes a scarce resource, it turns into a psychological currency that people compete for. You might try to be impressive, try to be useful, try to be noticed, but what you don't realize is that the more effort you invest in seeking their approval, the more power you transfer to them effortlessly. They also understand the psychology of anticipation, the emotional phenomenon where waiting for something creates more intensity than the thing itself. And they use this intentionally by never giving answers quickly, never showing their full plan, and never letting people feel completely certain. They keep others suspended between hope and uncertainty, because that emotional limbo makes people hyper-focused, emotionally invested, and more likely to agree to the next step just to end the tension. Anticipation makes their time feel more valuable, their decisions feel more impactful, and their presence feel more significant, because people psychologically magnify whatever they have to wait for. Then there's the tactic of emotional redirection, which is how they neutralize confrontations or difficult conversations without appearing defensive or guilty. Because instead of reacting emotionally to accusations or pressure, they redirect the emotional spotlight onto something else. Your reaction, your expectations, your assumptions, the bigger picture, the long-term vision, or a sudden new angle that appears more urgent than the original issue. This subtle redirection confuses your emotional focus, making you feel like your concern is less important or less justified. And before you know it, you're discussing a completely different topic while they walk away unscathed. They don't fight emotions, they reshape them. Another powerful psychological trick they use is emotional withdrawal, not as punishment, but as leverage, because they know the average person fears emotional distance more than confrontation. When someone powerful pulls away, stops responding, becomes colder, reduces access, you start to feel insecure, imagining what you did wrong, trying to fix it, analyzing every word or action. And in that anxious state, you become more agreeable and more eager to maintain harmony. They use withdrawal the way a puppeteer uses slack on a string. The moment you feel disconnected, you pull yourself back into alignment, allowing them to regain control without ever having to raise their voice or create conflict. They also practice emotional compartmentalization to a level most people can't fathom, separating the emotional, strategic, and relational aspects of their decisions with surgical precision. They can like you personally while eliminating you professionally. They can trust you strategically without trusting you emotionally. They can support you publicly while questioning you privately. And none of these contradictions cause them confusion because they don't allow emotion to contaminate their decision-making. This mental separation gives them an enormous advantage because it prevents the guilt, hesitation, or attachment that sabotages most people's choices. But perhaps one of the most advanced psychological tactics they use is the manipulation of emotional self-perception, because instead of directly controlling your feelings, they influence how you see yourself in relation to them. They make you feel slightly inferior but never humiliated, slightly uncertain but always hopeful, slightly impressed but never equal. And this emotional positioning makes you believe that you're the one who needs to rise to their level, rather than recognizing that the imbalance was manufactured. Once you adopt the belief that they operate on a higher plane, you naturally defer to their judgment, their expertise, and their authority, even when they are no more capable than you. And when you step back and connect all these patterns, the emotional asymmetry, the status anchoring, the delayed validation, the anticipation, the redirection, the withdrawal, the reframing, and the self-perception manipulation, you realize that the rich and powerful don't dominate through force or intimidation, but through invisible psychological structures that shape how people think, feel, and behave around them. Structures so subtle that by the time you notice them, you've already been influenced. Their true advantage is not wealth itself, but the emotional architecture they build around themselves. An architecture designed to keep them elevated, respected, and obeyed without ever appearing controlling. As you dive even deeper into the psychological strategies of the rich and powerful, you begin to realize that their influence isn't sustained by constant effort, but by carefully planted emotional triggers that continue operating long after the conversation ends. Because they don't just shape how you feel in the moment. They shape how you feel afterward, when you're alone, thinking, reflecting, planning, second-guessing, or replaying what was said. And this post-interaction emotional impact is where the real power hides. They know that if they can embed a thought, a doubt, a hope, a fear, or an expectation into your emotional memory, then your mind will keep doing their work for them long after they've left the room, because the human brain naturally loops unresolved emotions, and they deliberately leave you slightly unresolved every time. You start to notice that one of their most advanced strategies is the illusion of choice, a psychological trick that makes you feel like you're making your own decisions, even though every option you choose from ultimately leads back to them. They present pathways that look different, but emotionally funnel you toward the outcome they prefer. And because each path feels voluntary, you don't resist, you don't question, you don't feel manipulated. Instead, you feel responsible for your own direction. They give you two options, the one they want you to choose, and the one they know you'll reject. And by framing them as your decision, they keep their hands clean, while guiding your behavior with precision. This tactic is not just influence, it's engineered autonomy, making you emotionally invested in a choice that was never fully yours. Then there's the psychological technique of controlled unpredictability, a trait that keeps people slightly on edge, because the rich know that predictability creates comfort, and comfort creates equality. But unpredictability creates fascination, tension, respect, and sometimes fear, all emotions that reinforce power. They don't like to be readable or predictable, because when people can predict you, they can prepare for you. And the moment people can prepare for you, they reduce your influence. So instead, they stay strategically inconsistent, sometimes warm, sometimes distant, sometimes generous, sometimes strict, not out of emotional instability, but to maintain a psychological hierarchy where others remain uncertain, alert, and emotionally responsive. You begin to understand that their emotional power grows not from being loved or feared, but from being emotionally consequential, meaning your feelings shift based on their behavior. which gives them control over your inner world. If their approval makes you feel good, they have power. If their disapproval makes you feel uneasy, they have power. If their silence makes you anxious, they have power. If their attention makes you feel special, they have power. The trick is simple. They don't want you to feel neutral around them because neutrality is psychological freedom. They want you to feel something: admiration, curiosity, insecurity, desire, urgency, confusion, pressure. Because emotional stimulation keeps them central in your mental landscape, even when you're not physically around them. Another psychological tactic they rely on is strategic emotional scarcity. Not just the scarcity of their time or attention, but the scarcity of emotional clarity. They rarely tell you exactly what they think or feel. Instead, they make you infer, interpret, and analyze. And every time you analyze someone, you psychologically elevate them. The more you think about them, the more power they hold. They know that ambiguity forces your brain to fill in the blanks, and your brain will always fill in those blanks in a way that matches your emotional bias. If you admire them, you interpret their silence as wisdom. If you fear them, you interpret their silence as judgment. If you desire their approval, you interpret their silence as disappointment. And in all cases, the silence becomes far more powerful than speech ever could. They also use emotional escalation timing, a technique where they intensify emotional pressure only at the exact moment it benefits them most. For days or weeks, they might stay calm, collected, neutral. And then, suddenly, they bring sharp emotional intensity into the situation, raising their voice slightly, narrowing their eyes, shifting their posture, or speaking with controlled force, not to express real emotion, but to break your psychological rhythm and push you into a reactive state. Because when people become reactive, they become less logical, less confident, and more likely to concede, agree, or submit. This sudden burst of intensity is not anger, it's leverage, a calculated disruption of your emotional balance. One of the most fascinating, yet unsettling tricks they use is emotional debt creation, the subtle engineering of situations where you feel like you owe them something emotionally. Gratitude, loyalty, understanding, patience, trust. Even when they haven't actually done much, they do small favors at high-impact moments, offer encouragement when you feel low, give recognition when you need it most, or open small doors that feel like big opportunities. And these gestures create an emotional imbalance where you feel indebted to them, even though the practical value might be minimal. Humans are wired to repay emotional debts, but the rich use these debts as psychological anchors that bind people to them far more effectively than money ever could. Another psychological strategy they use is controlled emotional mirroring, but at a mastery level where they don't mirror your emotions to connect. They mirror your future emotions to influence. They reflect back the feelings they want you to eventually adopt, subtly embodying the version of yourself they want you to become in the context of their goals. If they want you ambitious, they mirror ambition. If they want you humble, they mirror calm superiority. If they want you compliant, they mirror certainty. If they want you dependent, they mirror exclusivity. By shaping the emotional image you see, they manipulate the emotional identity you internalize. And before you know it, you begin to adjust your behavior to fit the emotional tone they're projecting. They also master the psychology of emotional momentum, gradually leading conversations to emotional peaks that make their requests, proposals, or decisions feel natural, inevitable, or even necessary. They build tension, build curiosity, build desire, build mystery. And only at the moment when emotional momentum is highest do they present the next step. making you feel like moving forward is the obvious choice, even when logically it's not. Emotional momentum bypasses analysis, because when emotional pressure peaks, your brain stops scanning for alternatives and starts seeking closure. And whoever provides that closure becomes the perceived leader. Finally, one of the most powerful yet invisible psychological tactics they use is emotional narrative alignment, where they subtly reshape your internal story so that their presence feels like part of your personal journey rather than an external influence. They make you feel like working with them, following them, supporting them, or listening to them is aligned with your identity, your goals, your values, or your future. And once they succeed at this, resistance becomes emotionally dissonant. When someone becomes part of your story, they no longer need to force influence. You willingly give it, protect it, justify it, and even defend it against your own best interests. And by the time you recognize all of this, the emotional scarcity, the unpredictability, the illusion of choice, the emotional debt, the narrative alignment, the momentum, the escalation, you realize that the rich and powerful don't simply use psychology. They architect emotional experiences with precision, intention, and mastery, crafting environments where people willingly, unknowingly, and consistently give them the psychological advantage. And as everything you've learned about the psychology of the rich and powerful begins to connect, you realize that the final secret, the one most people never figure out, is that truly powerful individuals do not manipulate people directly. They manipulate the emotional environments people exist in, creating atmospheres, perceptions, expectations, and invisible rules that guide behavior automatically, long before conscious thought even has a chance to intervene. They know that if you influence someone's environment, you influence their choices, and if you influence their choices, you influence their future. And this understanding turns emotional manipulation into an ecosystem rather than an action, a system of psychological forces that operate seamlessly with or without their presence. The room behaves differently when they walk in. The group behaves differently when they speak, and you behave differently around them not because they forced you, but because they engineered an emotional atmosphere where compliance feels natural and resistance feels uncomfortable. You begin to realize that the emotional environments they build operate on 3 levels. The personal level, where they shape how you feel about yourself around them. The relational level, where they shape how you perceive your connection to them. And the structural level, where they shape the unspoken rules of the dynamic so subtly that you follow them without noticing. On the personal level, they use emotional calibration to adjust how you see yourself, sometimes elevating you, sometimes humbling you, so that your identity aligns with the role they want you to play. On the relational level, they use emotional exclusivity to make you feel uniquely seen or uniquely dependent. And on the structural level, they use emotional hierarchy to maintain the sense that they are always slightly above you, even when they appear friendly, equal, or supportive. This 3-layer structure turns emotional influence into something self-sustaining, something that doesn't end when the conversation ends. Then you see how they use what can only be described as psychological gravity, a force created by the combination of mystery, confidence, scarcity, and narrative control, which pulls people toward them the same way planets pull objects into orbit. They become centers of emotional mass. People move around them, adjust to them, coordinate with them, and align with them, often without realizing that they've reorganized their own emotional priorities to match someone else's psychological pull. This gravitational pull is built over time through subtle cues. The way they speak with certainty, even when uncertain. the way they hold stillness in moments when others would break, the way they ration their emotional expressions like rare currency, and the way they make you feel like understanding them is a puzzle worth solving. One of their most extraordinary techniques is emotional normalization, where they slowly make you accustomed to certain behaviors, standards, or expectations that would feel uncomfortable or unacceptable if introduced all at once. They raise the emotional temperature 1 degree at a time, introducing small shifts in tone, boundaries, hierarchy, or expectations until the new normal becomes emotionally familiar. Once something feels normal, it becomes unquestioned, and once something becomes unquestioned, it becomes powerful. The rich and powerful don't force compliance. They normalize it so gradually that by the time you adapt, you believe the adaptation came from you. They also weaponize emotional pattern recognition, detecting your emotional cycles, what triggers you, what motivates you, what intimidates you, what inspires you, and then aligning their behavior with those patterns so perfectly that it feels like they understand you on a deep level, when in reality they are simply reading predictable emotional signals. This creates the illusion of connection, compatibility, or trust, because humans naturally bond with those who seem to understand them, even when the understanding is strategically curated. They know that once someone feels understood, they stop questioning intentions, stop analyzing inconsistencies, and stop protecting themselves emotionally, creating fertile ground for influence. Another advanced tactic they rely on is emotional redirection of identity, where they subtly guide you towards seeing yourself in a role that benefits them: protector, student, ally, admirer, subordinate, or partner. And once you accept that identity emotionally, you begin acting in ways that reinforce it. This identity manipulation is so subtle that it often feels empowering rather than limiting, because they present the identity as an upgrade, a step forward, a higher version of yourself, even when it's actually positioning you in a role that centers them as the authority. Humans will fight harder to protect their identity than their logic, which is why identity manipulation is one of the most enduring psychological tools of the powerful. Then there is the emotional principle of strategic benevolence, where they offer help, support, or opportunity, not to create equality, but to establish emotional leverage. Because people who feel helped often feel loyal, grateful, or obligated. An emotional obligation is far more powerful than authority. They give small favors at precisely calculated moments. When you're overwhelmed, when you're uncertain, when you're striving, when you're vulnerable, and the timing makes the gesture feel bigger than it actually is. You internalize the narrative that they showed up for you, and that narrative becomes a psychological chain, soft but strong, binding you with emotions that feel warm even when they are strategically cold. You also begin to notice their mastery of emotional positioning, where they allow others to compete for their attention while maintaining emotional neutrality, creating the impression that they are above emotional chaos, above drama, above insecurity. And this elevated positioning makes them appear more valuable, more in control, and more necessary. They never chase, they attract. They never justify, they imply. They never plead, they suggest. This emotional positioning puts them at the center of desire, curiosity, respect, or intimidation, whichever emotion benefits them most, because the powerful understand that the person who cares less always controls more. And perhaps the final, most profound strategy they use is emotional inevitability, the psychological effect created when they present themselves as someone who is destined to succeed, destined to rise, destined to lead, destined to be followed. When people sense inevitability, They stop resisting and start adapting, because humans are wired to align with what feels certain and avoid what feels insecure. Powerful individuals use this by embodying unshakable certainty, not arrogance, but conviction. Making others feel like supporting them is the safest emotional choice, the most logical choice, and sometimes even the only choice. By the time you finally step back and see all of this, the gravity, the normalization, the pattern recognition, the identity guidance, the benevolence, the illusion of inevitability, you realize that the psychology of the rich and powerful is not just about influencing emotions. It is about building an emotional reality where their presence becomes the anchor point for everyone around them. And the moment you understand these tools, you stop being unconsciously influenced by them and start seeing the psychological architecture behind every powerful person you encounter, giving you the ability not just to resist their influence, but to use the same tools to build your own power, your own emotional gravity, and your own unshakable presence in a world where the real currency isn't money. It's the ability to shape how people feel. Thanks for watching. If you found this video helpful or eye-opening, make sure to hit the like button. It really helps the channel grow. And don't forget to subscribe for more practical psychology insights, self-awareness tools, and mind-sharpening advice. Take care, and I'll see you in the next video.